Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, welcome again to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Is anybody here for the first time today? Oh, great, welcome. What's your name?
Jose.
Jose, nice to meet you. We're going to start by just going around the room and saying our name, our first name. And maybe a little slowly so we get a chance to let it sink in. So it's nice to know who you're talking to. I'm David.
Doug. I'm Bob. I'm Richard.
CJ. Paul.
I'm Steve.
I'm Jay. I'm Darren.
Robert.
Marvin. Sorry.
Patrick. Marvin.
I'm Howard. John. Todd. Randy. Marty. Lucas.
Larry. Peter.
Dale. I'm Ray.
Jack.
Michael. Art. Joe. Adam. Paul. Peter. Lee.
Jim.
Clint. Phil. Francis.
Cass.
Jose. Jay.
Last week, Roger Corliss started us off with a talk on the Bhava Chakra, which Steve's put up here. And the Wheel of Becoming illustrates the different realms of existence and how they're interacted. And tied that in with addiction and codependence and issues like that we're all familiar with and not so familiar with. So this next month, 2 months, 3 months, we're going to be looking at those issues. And to start us off here, we have today 2 Sangha members who will speak on a personal level about their experiences with recovery and Buddhism. Because the talk is being recorded for our website, and in the spirit of 12-step recovery groups, where anonymity is the foundation of the program, I have my reading glasses that would be better. We are identifying them by their first names only. We also ask that if you discuss what's said here with other people, that you not identify the speakers by name. That said, I'd like to welcome Steve and Paul.
Thank you. In 1999, I stopped drinking. In 2000, I stopped going to church. And I found my way here in the year 2000. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk about both of these practices. The 2 most important guiding paths for me in the last 6 years have been the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the path of Buddhism. Did I mention that in 2002 I turned 50? So we might have a midlife crisis going on here, or a midlife opportunity. F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was an alcoholic, wrote that in American life there are no second acts. I'd like to prove him wrong. I think the challenge for me about midlife is how to reinvent myself, how to get around to doing those things I never got around to doing, how to break old habits, and how to live life fully. I don't think I'm the only one in the room for whom those are questions. And these 2 programs, both Alcoholics Anonymous and Buddhism as I've experienced it here, have been essential to that. I need to say that I do not speak for Alcoholics Anonymous. I only speak from my own experience. I also want to say that I have an uneasy relationship with both programs. I have perfected my identity as an outsider. I come here every Sunday seeking community, and I leave early. I do that at program too for AA meetings. I do the same thing. Kind of approach avoidance. And both practices say, Steve, do whatever you're going to do. We're not going to bother you. But they do encourage me to notice what I'm doing and accept it. They're not going to tell me what to do or what to say or what to believe. But both programs would caution me about my tendency to isolate and ask me to notice that at the same time. And I think both programs would say, don't wander off too far. Stay connected to community. There's a slogan in AA about look for similarities, not for differences. And that is really important to me because I always look for the differences. I'm either not good enough or you're either not good enough. And program encourages us to look for the similarities. I do the same thing here. This is a group of people with whom I can identify, for better or for worse. If we were to rename ourselves Grumpy Buddhist Fellowship, I would qualify. I think a lot of us have our rough edges. I don't think I'm the only one that comes here seeking community and stumbles over the very thing we want most. And I'm learning here in this Sangha, and I'm learning in my meetings at AA, that not if, but when conflict arises. Not when, but not if, but when. The only question is how skillfully we deal with it. And I've seen this community really deal skillfully with conflict. There have been Sundays I don't want to come because I thought there was going to be a fight, and somehow we rose above it. There's a principle in program that says practice restraint of tongue and pen. Useful for me. Practice restraint of tongue and pen. I would add email to that. For me, just to take a breath and don't go for the bait. Don't go for the bait. That's been important to me. It's a little odd talking about 12-step here in San Francisco where it's part of the common culture. So what I'd like to do is kind of talk about my own experience in both Buddhism and program. Some of you may be in program. There's some of it that's sort of the common culture, common language, but my hope is to share a little bit that might help us understand both paths. You know that when we start speaking, you see it on the news, on TV, you have to say, my name is Steve and I'm an alcoholic. I hated saying that. I still hate saying that. I resisted it for a long time. In fact, I could prove I wasn't an alcoholic because I had a little date book. And in my date book, I had a little code to keep track of what I was doing. G was for gin, M was for marijuana, N was for NyQuil, D was for Dramamine. So I could prove I wasn't an alcoholic. I had it right here. It took somebody at an AA meeting to say, Steve, normal people don't do that. So that whole question of identity about naming ourselves alcoholics, I wish I wasn't in that chair, but Jar Blanche, jar. More and more I've come to understand the identity we use as alcoholics really could be a cipher for the human condition. That the reality of suffering is the First Noble Truth. And those of us in program have one particular way of expressing that. But I think it is the human condition. When Roger talked about the wheel last week, I thought he did a great job with that we get caught on something. We get just caught. And Buddhism has a way of describing that as the different realms. And we can get caught on jealousy or envy or fear. We just get stuck. Life has difficult questions and we get trapped in the wrong answers. That's how I would define addiction. Life has difficult questions. We get stuck in the wrong answers. I also loved how Roger talked about the center of this wheel, the three poisons. There are three animals that chase each other. In Chinese Buddhism, the three poisons. The first is attachment, which he explained as, if I only had this, I'd be happy. Traditionally symbolized by the rooster. Roger made a good case for calling it the cock. The second poison, aversion. If I only didn't have this, I'd be happy, symbolized by the serpent. And then the pig. The pig symbolizes what I've always called ignorance. But Roger made a case that it's not ignorance, because ignorance, give me a book, I could fix it. It's worse than that. It's lack of clarity, it's misperceiving, it's delusion. That's much more serious. We don't even see what we don't see. And I think that's another important piece of what we call addiction. He also helped me understand higher power, which I've always struggled with. He defined that as when you're trapped in the wheel, it has its own self-generating qualities, and we're trapped in it. You need something from outside the wheel to help you see that. Light went on for me. We need something from outside ourselves to help us get out of our own self-referential experience. Clint said it a couple weeks ago, where there's different ways to see things. Simple as that. There's different ways to see things. A little bit about the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you know there are 12. The first one is about admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. Unmanageability is the first noble truth. We get stuck. All of a sudden life isn't what we wanted it to be. And our literature talks about what was destructive drinking, when we stop drinking, becomes destructive thinking. I get that. Even when we're not drinking, the patterns and the habits of how we perceive things are still there. The powerlessness thing, I think that's a similar challenge for both Buddhist practice and recovery practice. Powerlessness gets misunderstood in my experience. The program says we're powerless over alcohol or very specific things. We're not existentially powerless. And I hear a lot of talk in AA about, it's like victimhood. You know, I'm sorry I didn't call you back, I'm an alcoholic. I can't get a job, I'm an alcoholic. I think it's a misunderstanding, and if you know the serenity prayer, which is really important, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can. It's right there. The courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think both American Buddhism and recovery shares that issue of how do you engage the world without giving up. How do we do that skillfully? Step 2 is about a power greater than ourselves. Step 3, made a decision. Made a decision. There's a third step prayer which says, relieve me of the bondage of self. If that is incompatible with Buddhism, relieve me of the bondage of self. And make a decision. Do something. Follow a path. 12 steps, 8 steps, who cares? Follow a path. Move is the point. Then there's 4, 5, 6, 7. We take an inventory of ourselves, a good hard look. We recognize our defects of character. And the way program defines defects to me is really interesting because it kind of has a negative ring to it. Defects of character are simply basic human longings for sex, for security, for society. They're very natural and they're very wonderful, but somehow the way I've been doing it is really unskillful. Really unskillful, and it's become a defect. But at its heart, it's a really basic human thing. I'm not a bad person. I want to be loved, I want to be this, but the way I'm going about it has become a defect. And I think that's important. It's not about shame. It's about honesty and change. Step 6 and 7 are about being willing to release those defects. I'm a 6th grade teacher. Show, don't tell. I brought in 2 of my Buddhist friends. This is Manjushri. That's Guanyin. Manjushri is Tibetan god of wisdom. He holds a sword. The sword is to cut away delusion. One of my meditations for wisdom is let him cut away delusion. I don't hold the sword, he does. This is all metaphorical, but I get what that's about. Cutting away delusion is really hard to do. I shouldn't hold a knife. Let him do it. At the same time, you've got Kuan Yin, who's the goddess of compassion. She holds that little vase to hold our tears. You gotta love her. And these are the two wings of Buddhism, wisdom and compassion, and both, I think, are what we need. And Program would talk about it in a similar way. Our sponsors represent to us, that's a person we work with closely, how to do this and mix it with that. Where it's not judgment, it's just clarity. It's humility without shame. We make our amends. We don't do that until we've disarmed ourselves. That's what 6 and 7 are about. Get rid of your problems. Get rid of your hand grenades. And when you're ready, start making amends. We take inventories. And step 11 encourages us to do prayer and meditation. It's 1939, and they're talking about meditation when these steps were written. I just think that's an amazing insight. And step 12 is about reaching out. It's the Mahayana. It's the Bodhisattva vow. Reach out. There's a world out there. Even the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is where this program is, it's 100 people got together in 1939 and wrote down their experience of how they got sober. Sounds like Buddhist sutras in a way. This is what worked for these people. At the end it even says, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We recognize we know only a little. I like that. That's pretty honest. They even added an appendix at the end, the second edition, because they said we realized we gave one impression of sobriety and conversion, but it's bigger than we thought. And they even included Appendix 2, which quotes William James, who wrote Varieties of Religious Experience. Great title, Varieties of Religious Experience. So program to me, just like Buddhism, encourages me to find my own path with the help of some outside sources as well. Big word of caution, if I'm inspiring you to run to an AA meeting, God knows what you're going to find. They're all different. They're all different. They can be very difficult. In San Francisco, there tends to be a little more tolerance. You can be Buddhist and it's fine. That might not be true at a Texas AA meeting. And one thing we say in AA is, it's a good thing we're not all sick at the same time. So, who knows? People say different things. We're not there because we're well. A lot of common ground between the two paths. One is this notion of identity and emptiness. We're an anonymous program. We don't use our last names at the level of press, radio, and film. We have a slogan of principles before personalities. Really useful stuff, because there's a lot of egos in an AA meeting. A lot of egos. Not that there's any here. But just to kind of put that on the back burner is useful. The whole notion of acceptance. It's the very same thing in Buddhism as it is in AA to me. Some of you know that the day before Thanksgiving my retina detached. And I'm on an operating table on Thanksgiving Day. 3 operations later, it's still not repaired. They're working on it. I've had a lot of time to practice acceptance around that. One of the treatments was they injected a bubble in my eye to hold in the retina when they put it back. And I had to keep my head down like this for 10 days, 24 hours a day. Luckily, I had practiced in meditation. Seriously, I don't know how I would have done that without a little bit of... I thought 20 minutes was a long time. And the other thing about acceptance around that, I have coworkers who say, Steve, normally you're pretty agitated at work. You're one of these reformers and you're going to change the world. But with your eye, you're being remarkably calm. And I really heard that. And somehow I'm grateful that I got it, that the eye thing I can't worry about. I can't fight it. Do what the doctor says. It's going to take months. There's another operation this summer. Somehow acceptance kicked in on that. And I'm not normally that accepting. The other common ground, I'll close with this, is working with others, being with others. The three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the community. AA is the same way. Don't try to do it on your own. We need other people. We have to accept other people, hard as that is. But that's tied in with how we accept ourselves. There's a really beautiful, this is a Buddhist book, The Way of the Bodhisattva. And it just says, and catching sight of others, look upon them with open, loving hearts, for it will be through them that you come to Buddhahood. Catching sight of others, look on them with open, loving hearts, for it will be through them that you will come to Buddhahood. So I'm really grateful for both these paths. They've made a real difference in my life. I'm grateful to all of you for being part of that. And thank you for letting me be of service.
Well, I'm Paul, and I'm recovering from anorectic sex, love, and fantasy addiction. And I'm in the program Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, which is also a 12-step program. We have very similar, we have the same steps as Alcoholics Anonymous, but we work the program around sex, love, and sex and love addiction. And what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about elements of my childhood that led to the sex and love addiction, how it manifested itself, and how Buddhism has helped me in specific elements of Buddhism that I've drawn on that have been really helpful in dealing with it. So that's my overall. And then I've talked about this before, like at SLA meetings, but I've never meditated before I've talked about it. And I find this, I'm much rawer after meditation. This would be easier for me to do if I just came right off the street. So anyway, what is, first of all, I wanted to say, what is anorexia? Because when usually if I say, well, I'm a sex and love addict with anorexia, people say, oh, you have a food disorder or something. And actually, we have we have a pamphlet about anorexia, and at the beginning there's a little description of it that I want to read, which says that as an eating disorder, anorexia is defined as the compulsive avoidance of food. In the area of sex and love, anorexia has a similar definition. Anorexia is the compulsive avoidance of giving or receiving social, sexual, or more emotional nourishment. And so the key word there is the compulsive avoidance, because someone might make a rational decision to be celibate, for instance, and that would not be anorectic because it wouldn't be compulsive. But if someone is completely withdrawn from sexuality and desires to have sex, for instance, and compulsively avoids it, then that would be like a sexual anorectic, for example. So my childhood, there's three elements of my childhood that showed up again very clearly in my sex life and in my recovery and in how I use elements of Buddhism to help me. And I wanted to mention those three. One is that in early childhood, my therapist thinks I had like 15% of But I had like 15% of my emotional needs met as a really young kid, going up to maybe 25% when I was at 10 and older. And so that's not old enough to really mature emotionally. And what I did, as early as I can remember, I'd cut myself off from all my feelings. So, as a 4-year-old, for instance, I didn't have feelings of wanting to be cared for or loved. I was the only boy in my grade school class who never cried. And being a sissy, that was a challenge to the other boys to see if they could make me cry. But there was no way I was not going near crying. And the fact that I can cry now is a sign of my recovery. Secondly, when I was 8, I was severely abused by a caretaker, or sometimes a couple of caretakers. And I tried to resist it physically, and I was always overpowered, and that this is one of the major traumas of my early childhood. The third element is my father, that I didn't really meet until I was 9, and he was a picture, though, on my mother's wall, and I fantasized how this was going to be my savior, mostly unconscious, that he was going to come and save me from this bad situation that I was in as a child. And then I met him, and he didn't. And in fact, he lived in Europe, and I only saw him every couple of years, and he wasn't like this, anything but like a minimal father, sort of. And what happened after I met him is that I actually regressed emotionally. And so by the time I entered my adolescence, I was not at a place where I was prepared emotionally to engage in sexuality or other feelings that are normal, that normally come up with adolescence. And I completely closed down emotionally. I did all right in school and stuff, but in the area of dating and so forth, I didn't, or sex drive, I didn't recognize any feelings like that. When I was 19, I had my first crush on another man, and for 7 years or so, I had crushes, usually very obsessive crushes, alternating with periods of no emotions at all. And when I was 26, I had my first sexual experience, and then for several decades, I had a fairly active sex life. And but there were elements that I traced back to my childhood that reflected in my sex life, and one of them was that I never untouched those feelings that I bottled up as a 3-year-old for wanting intimacy and caring. Those I left off the table, and if anybody tried to show me caring or intimacy, real intimacy, I would flee from them. And on the other hand, I would pursue men who were unavailable. Either they were not interested in me, or they were also emotionally closed. And some of these pursuits would last for actually years at a time, and had a very obsessional quality to them. So that's how I dealt with that closing down. I also, in terms of the abuse, that I recreated my child abuse sexually, and that appealed to me a lot. And I call it a kind of quasi-intimacy, because it seems very intimate that there's this intense relationship built around abuse. But actually it's really just a closed-off part of myself that this part is okay, because in fact my childhood, the physical abuse was the most attention I got in certain ways physically. And then the third thing about my father, that reason I said I was a fantasy addict to begin with, that I tend to fantasize about men, and I would, like I did with my father, I would give men qualities, they're strong, they're going to save me, they're this and that and the other. I'd idealize, we say in SLAA, idealize and pursue them. I would idealize and pursue men, and then I would dump them when it turned out they weren't all of these qualities that I'd invested in them. So that was kind of the sexual aspect of my. Let's see if I left off anything. During those decades of my sex life, I also had periods of complete withdrawal and closing down, and I would sort of punctuate that with that. And in my late 40s, I sort of retreated almost only to phone sex, and that was extremely compulsive for me. I wasn't able to control how much I did it. And it was kind of it was during the AIDS period, and it was a kind of withdrawal from even having one-on-one touching sex. Then in my early 50s, but I want to mention also during those decades, though, I had a very productive professional life, and I was a lawyer. I did a lot of political work. I was well thought of. I got a lot of like esteem from what I did, and not. It was really kind of like I wasn't ever able to accept love for myself. But if I did A, B, C, and D, and E, then people would like me, and they did, and so forth, and so that was kind of like how I got a lot of self-satisfaction in life. In my early 50s, I was between jobs, and I was thinking, because I tended to work in things that really took up almost all my time, or what new area I was going to work in. And a friend said, well, why don't you see a therapist and just sort of do a light, he said, I go once every week or two, and we just sort of do light overview of where my life is going, and it's kind of fun and easy. And so why don't you do that? So I thought, well, I had a lot of therapy in my early 20s, but I hadn't for decades seen anyone, and I thought, well, okay. And so I went and saw this man, and I said, well, I'd like to come once a week for 2 months, and we'll do like an overview of my life and so forth. But instead came all of this stuff that for 50 years I had kept bottled up. About my child abuse and all of it. And it's kind of like opening the Pandora's box. I mean, really, because there's a reason I kept it all bottled up, was that it was so intense, so desperate, so raw, so unmanageable. And yet, for some reason, and I'm grateful to myself for doing this, because most people who are anorectic, emotionally anorectic, actually never do this. But I decided to open up this box, and it all came flowing out. And in terms of my relationships with men, they became more obsessional than less, because my desperate childhood, any attempt for me to create an adult relationship that had sort of like emotional content with a man, my desperate parts would take that over, and so so I had more intense obsessional relationships in that period, and for that reason I ended up. My therapist suggested I go to SLAA, and so I did, and I started working the steps, which have the spiritual component, which I have not addressed since I was a Catholic high school for a couple of years, but since then I had not been at all spiritually inclined or interested. And so part of doing the second and third step was to explore different ways of having a spiritual basis. The reason that I came into SLA, one reason was that I became completely obsessed about one particular man, and he was going to be my partner, and it didn't matter that he wasn't interested in even dating me, and that I thought about him night and day, and so then in SLA that was helpful to me. But then he started dating someone else, and before that he hadn't been, and that kind of doubled the obsessional qualities about him for me. And at that time I had a sponsor who was familiar with GBF, and he suggested that I come and check it out. So I came here, and the first day I came, Jim Wilson was talking about the second noble truth, which is that attachment is the source of suffering. And I feel so grateful. I felt so grateful. I felt so surprised that there was this body of spiritual thought that recognized my suffering. And so I came for 6 months at that time to GBF, and then I left for a couple of years, and then I came back about 3 years ago, and I've been coming regularly ever since. And today GBF is part of my recovery program, along with SLAA and my therapy and fellowship and friendships forming. And I've actually had a huge amount of recovery I've been working on this for 16 years, that I no longer am, my desperate parts are appeased. I've appeased them. I've developed healthy emotional capacities. I'm able to hold complexities in relationships now, which before I never could. And I had an intimate sexual relationship that lasted over a year. That was actually completely different than any kind of sexual relationship I'd ever had before. And now I'm exploring new ways of being continually vulnerable, open in my friendships, and I've been doing some dating, and so that's kind of what's going on now. I see actually my recovery as a lifelong commitment, and that I will continue to work on emotional growth for all my life. And I'm in my mid-60s, but this is an exciting time for me of openness and breaking new ground. And so in the remaining time, I want to talk about specific things, elements of Buddhism that have meant the most to me, and that I've drawn. And I mentioned, actually, one thing about Buddhism is that I look on it kind of as a paradigm of approaching life, of relating to people, and to myself, that is completely different than the paradigm of my family of origin, or of any kind of thing that I could have imagined before. And part of it is like, I frequently, and still to this day, every time I hear a Dharma talk, I learn some new way of approaching life or relationships that I never conceived of before. It was like, or that I never really even thought was possible. So I mentioned like the second noble truth, second and the third noble truth, which like that attachment, we don't have to suffer from attachment. That's obviously a major importance to me. The fourth noble truth in the Eightfold Path, I found extremely helpful. And what I got most from that, in thinking about right speech, right action, and so forth, is that intention is what's most important. I'm not giving a Dharma talk. I'm just saying for what I feel. Okay, what I've gotten out of this is like that the intention is what matters the most, and that so that how I treat myself, for instance, when I do something, I look not to say, well, that's okay, that's not on my bottom line. And necessarily we have bottom lines, like I will not do X, Y, and Z, because as opposed to, it's not like one thing, like I'm not going to drink or I'm not going to take drugs. It's like, it's a matter of conduct here. And so we have bottom lines and we have top lines. And like bottom lines for me would be like maybe calling someone that I've decided I don't want to deal with. Or the top line might be that I'm going to do something that is healthy for myself. So if I see myself doing conduct that I think is maybe unhealthy, or I look to my intention as opposed to what exactly the conduct is. And so intention is a very high standard, I feel. I feel like Buddhism creates a very high bar, because you can't get away with saying, well, that wasn't exactly a lie, say. Right? You have to look at like, what did you mean? So anyway, the boundaries and walls. We had Kirsten DeLeo spoke here in March about metta, and I've been in the Wednesday night meditation study group, and we were studying metta at that time. And she said that one of her teachers said that for Westerners they should include "May I be safe" in their metta meditation. So I started doing that, and I realized that my notion of safety was still a lot dealt with walls. That somehow if I had a wall around me, and then I was behind the wall, then I would be safe. But cowering behind a wall is not a good approach to safeness. It worked for me when I was a kid, because what else could I have done? But now it's not the way to go in terms of relating to people. And so I started imagining boundaries as a way of being safe. Like if I can tell someone, well, I feel like doing this but not that, or something like that. And then they can say, well, I don't want to do anything with you, or they could say, yes, that sounds right, or whatever the reaction is, it can be dealt with. And so this way of seeing how to relate to people, how to be in my life, has been very profound for me, and kind of like crystallized there doing the metta meditation. Then another theme is self-love and opening the heart. The notion in metta of that, may I be safe. There's a lot of self-love there, and I really saw how I have a problem with self-love, and how can I deal with that, and how can I work that into, because if I can't love myself fully, I think, and Kirsten made this point, how can I can accept other people's love. It's always easier for me to love other people than to have them love me. We have letting go of feelings. This for someone who's like sort of compulsive attachment. Is like the usual like breath meditation, and then have a feeling and let it go, and have another feeling or a thought, and this and that, and they're all treated kind of like the same. I think about my laundry, and then I think about some intense experience, and then I think about some longing or something, and I let them all go equally. It kind of sends a message to me that approach to feelings, that not to get hung up. They're just feelings. I don't have to cling on to them or obsess about them over and over, that I can sort of practice. The fact that even we use the word practice has been very helpful to me, because it implies not perfection, and it implies that we can be forgiving of ourselves and start over. And the middle way is a big one for me, because for most of my life I was either able to have like a compulsive obsessional relationship or nothing. And I didn't have the concept of something that was well balanced, that was intimate, that was complex, and so forth. And so the middle way is a big thing. And I'll just mention my last seconds here: acceptance of feelings. Oh, and opening. Here's a quote from Sharon Salzberg's book on loving kindness: opening to pain and developing an appropriate relationship to it, as part of feeling a sympathetic joy and loving kindness. Opening to pain, that's the thing of opening my box, and today I'm continuing to let myself feel painful things, but the appropriate relationship, I just love that phrase. What is an appropriate relationship to pain? And it doesn't mean slamming the door on it, and it doesn't necessarily mean like suffering from it. So anyway, my time's up, and I thank you all for this opportunity. We have questions. We have time for questions.
Steve, you talked about leaving the church in 2000, but most of your talk didn't much to that. I'm just fascinated by that, because I was working as well recently for a Christian church organization. Can you talk a little bit about what it meant? I know you were actually quite deeply involved in the church. What it meant to have that vocation and then to have it shift?
I was always active in my home church, Methodist Youth Fellowship. I went to New York. I was a school teacher, closeted upstate New York. I needed to find a way to go to New York City to take care of being a homosexual. So I went to Union Seminary, which is a pretty well-known liberal seminary in New York, and I only went there to be gay. But then I got a Master of Divinity, so I figure I might want to use that. So I got involved with MCC, the gay church, and pastored MCC Boston for 5 years. And after, I don't believe in lifetime anymore, in lifetime things like that. I think there are seasons of life. And like I talked about when the mayor of Sonoma was here, leadership is hard and there's a cost for it. And I'm really grateful I did that. It was a lot of service, and the pay was nonprofit. But I knew when it was time to stop. I think the public role can be very debilitating. And for me, I had this inner voice say, Steve, put it down. So I moved out to San Francisco and became a school teacher again. So in a nutshell, it was just different seasons of life.
Clint.
Well, actually, this is for Paul. You talked about, I don't want to paraphrase incorrectly, but the difficulties with sex and love addiction, in the sense that it's not like just you don't do this behavior like drinking or taking drugs, but it's like you have to find this middle way where you do it in a healthy way. And that means, and you talked about confronting delusional thinking and excuse making. I wonder if you could go into that a little bit about how you can really see how a behavior or a thought pattern like that is delusional versus is truthful. How you can, because we can fool ourselves so easily, and I know that's something we all share. And I wonder how you make that distinction.
Well, that's one of the things of working the steps is that you and having a sponsor and going to meetings and that process leads to kind of like a doing a moral inventory of ourselves and becoming aware of our character defects and all of that. That whole process then leads to kind of like a grounding in reality. And from that, then once you get a basis of reality, you can see what's not real. Because for me, that's why I mentioned a paradigm. Because if you live in a paradigm that's delusional, then you can't see what the delusions are. And so it's really necessary to learn to ground. For me, my higher power, for example, is not an external a God so much as a healthy inner part of myself. And so if I can base myself in a healthy place, then things that are not healthy become very clear. If I slip into my unhealthy place as a place for deciding on what's right and what's wrong, then I'm lost, basically. So I need this. And what Roger last week was talking about with the wheel, that you need like something external which is the idea of a higher power to sort of jar out of this circle of obsession or compulsion or addiction, right, into a saner reality. It's a process, really. Because if you try to tell someone who's in that state, well, this isn't rational, it won't necessarily hear that because of the context for hearing that is not a rational context. So I don't know. I don't know. Do you have anything to say about that, Steve?
I would just make a plug for AA meetings. Can be pretty funny too. We hear each other say things that nobody else would get. Or maybe you would get it. Like there's a line in AA that drinking, first it was fun, then it was fun with problems, then it was just problems. And when people talk about that, like what they were thinking that morning, crazy thinking, and a lot of AA meetings are really just kind of saying what you're thinking, and the room will get it. We'll usually be laughing at how silly it is the next day that we were thinking that. There's a lot of humor about, my God, that's fucked up. So yeah, you kind of getting it out of yourself and getting out of the self-referential thing is important.
And you find the community in the AA program listens to your thought and your feeling and gives you feedback about whether they think that you're...
Oh, no crosstalk.
Oh.
You share once if you want to, and that's it.
I see.
So that's actually very useful, or else it would get...
Yeah.
But you have a chance to say it, and you get to hear yourself. And maybe after the meeting, someone might come over and say, I had the same thing happen to me.
The relationship with the sponsor is also important. Right? And so, and then part of the role of sponsorship is to work with the person and on these issues. And there is like crosstalk. And then also this fellowship, which is a very important aspect of the program. And to also be able to call someone, if you're feeling like acting out, you can call someone instead. There's ways that we always pass around a phone list at meetings, and So there's some of the tools that we call the tools of the program.
So mostly I just wanted to thank you for how heartfelt sharing. I was very touched by it. And I was struck also knowing both of you a little bit and other people here. I can imagine Asians talking about how those Westerners are so interface and so very losing face that we don't share our vulnerability, and I look around and everybody else seems so together in body, mind, and spirit. It's the same way I felt about families, and so it's very helpful to realize that I'm not the only one that has issues, and I'm also in, I went from Al-Anon to SLAA to ACOA and currently Hood. Thank you.
I just also want to thank you. I mean, hanging out the sword of discernment and Kuan Yin, and I think we both embody that, and I think we've all been assisted by your perspective. I mean, I think your connection to your higher power, however you define it, has informed our experience today. And it's very, very well. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's probably. Is there? Oh, I'm sorry.
You start.
No, I was going to close it down. Do you have a question?
No, I just want to say I think that this type of sharing, where Sangha members get up and talk, really builds the Sangha for me. I like both of you beforehand, but I just feel so much closer and more open, and it just feels like you honored the room so much with this. And as a person who has similar path to the two of you in a mix of both of these tools and whatever, sometimes I get annoyed that the 12-step program kind of makes everything into a disease. That's kind of wacky to me. And on the other end, I like that Buddhism makes it all kind of human experience. That's kind of what it is. And it's something in between those two things, because one of the things we don't do in this group, I used to love being able to call my sponsor or calling other people in the fellowship and just bitch and moan and do whatever you have to do to kind of get past a difficult point. This culture that we have in this room doesn't feel like there's that much opportunity to do exactly that. So that's there's a good part to the fact that the 12-step program does it in the way that it does. And just that you're willing to share in such a vulnerable and open setting, and that we understand, I believe that this whole room understands what you guys are doing here and why is a beautiful thing. So thank you so much, both of you.
I'll just make it short. Paul, I just want to say your bravery is really touched me. And to be so vulnerable is really wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you both for wonderful sharing. Heartfelt sharing. And let's close down. We'll get in a.
Do you want to say anything about?
Oh, we got announcements. Every fifth Sunday, so I get out of practice. Go ahead, please.
I'm the host today. I'm Trent. Let me say first to our guests, if you have questions about anything, I hope you'll feel welcome to ask them. They're all sort of friendly folks. And you can ask me, I won't know the answer, but I'll get somebody who does, etc. So welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Please feel welcome.
Thank you.
Then we have some cookies. We have a Donna bowl. So before you take the cookies, please put in the Donna bowl. And thank you very much. And then after you take the cookies and have tea, please be careful to wash your cup. Put it away. Clean up. Be sure to eat all the cookies. We can't leave anything for the mice because they're bleed and spread and so on, which of course is terrible. You can tell I don't really think that, but that's all right. I'm supposed to say that. Anyway, we do have to clean them, though, very carefully. And I think that's it. What have I forgotten?
Well, there's a sign-up sheet.
There's a sign-up sheet, yes.
I'll put a separate sheet out there because we're trying to compile names for a GBF hard copy directory. And at the beginning of this push, we had sheets out there, but it's also in the newsletter that you can send your information to GBF mailing list at sbcglobal.net. That's in the newsletter. Todd told me that since we stopped putting out sign-up sheets for it, nobody has submitted it. And we only have 25 names right now, and we haven't really established what is the threshold for publishing a directory, but the old one had a couple hundred names in it. So I'll put a sheet out there now, and if you want to be on it, you can also do the email bit. GBF mailing list at sbcglobal.net.
I'm the potluck committee. And if anybody wants to hold a potluck, open their home to us, just see me at some point. I'm usually here every week. There is a potluck on June 11th at Kay's place out in Berkeley. It's got a very beautiful home. And flyers will come out in a couple of weeks concerning that. So.
I'm Bob Siedelkamp, and I'm the person who picks up the mail, and then any announcements we receive I put out on the coffee table there for you to read. And there's some there now. But I'm moving to Berkeley in June. So if someone, and the mailbox is in the Castro, and I don't always go there every week. If there's someone who lives nearby who would like to pick up the mail every week, I've got the list of duties. So come talk to me, be a way you could be of service to GBF. And it's a very easy way.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Could everyone stand up? It's all one big heart circle. We can all share in that. By the power and the truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.